What would you do if everything you believed was a lie, and the proof was burning in front of you? April 1945. American troops stood at the gates of a women's labor camp in Bavaria. The guards were gone. The gates were open. But the women inside weren't celebrating. They were terrified. These weren't concentration camp victims. They were Nazi party members, true believers, women who'd worn the swastika with pride. And now an American lieutenant colonel was giving them an order that made no sense. Burn your uniforms, all of them, right now. The women refused. They clutched those brown shirts and Nazi armbands like they were sacred. Some were crying. Others were defiant. One woman screamed, "You can't make us. These represent everything we've built." The American officer looked at her and said something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. "In 3 days, you'll beg me to let you forget you ever wore them." Most of the soldiers thought he was crazy. The women thought he was bluffing. But he knew something they didn't. He'd just come from Dachau, and he was about to make these women understand what their uniforms really represented. The war in Europe was collapsing. Hitler was dead. The Reich was rubble. But in this camp outside Munich, reality hadn't caught up yet. These weren't random women. They were Reichsarbeitsdienst, the Reich Labor Service, the RAD. Germany's massive workforce program that had mobilized millions. By 1945, over 5 million young German women had cycled through the RAD. It was mandatory. 6 months of service, physical labor, ideological training, military-style discipline. They drained swamps, built roads, harvested crops, dug tank traps, and they did it all in uniform. Brown skirts, white blouses, swastika armbands, Nazi insignia on everything. The uniform wasn't just clothing. It was identity. It meant you belonged. It meant you were building the 1,000-year Reich. It meant you were part of something greater than yourself. These women had grown up in the Hitler Youth. They'd been taught that service to the folk was the highest calling, that the Führer was infallible, that Germany's enemies were subhuman. And now American soldiers were telling them it was over. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Orr wasn't a typical officer. Before the war, he'd been a philosophy professor at Columbia. His specialty was mass movements and ideological conformity. The Army made him a psychological operations officer. His job, denazification, breaking the spell of fascism in German minds. He'd studied Nazi propaganda methods. He understood how the regime manufactured belief, how it turned doubt into certainty, how it made ordinary people do extraordinary evil. And he knew that telling these women, "You were wrong," would accomplish nothing. Humans don't abandon deeply held beliefs just because someone says so. You can't logic someone out of a position they didn't logic themselves into. Orr had learned this the hard way. In town after town, he'd tried rational arguments, showed evidence of Nazi crimes, explained international law. The Germans would nod politely and ignore him. Their minds had walls built around certain truths, walls that rational argument couldn't breach. So Orr stopped trying to convince them. He started engineering experiences that shattered those walls from the inside. The women at the labor camp numbered about 400, ages 16 to 35. They'd been performing agricultural work when the front collapsed. Their male supervisors fled. The women stayed. They had nowhere else to go. Germany was an apocalypse. Cities bombed to ash. Millions displaced. Food scarce. Authority structures dissolved. These women clung to the camp because it was familiar. It had rules. It had order. It had uniforms that told them who they were. When Orr's unit arrived on April 30th, the women were standing in formation, like they were waiting for inspection, still wearing full RAD uniform, still following protocols, still acting like the Reich existed. Orr's sergeant asked, "Should we disarm them?" Orr looked at the women. Not one had a weapon. "They're already disarmed," he said. "They just don't know it yet." He walked into the camp alone, 400 women staring at him. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply said, "The war is over. Germany has surrendered. You are no longer members of the Reich Labor Service. Remove your uniforms and burn them. You have 1 hour." Then he walked out. The women didn't move. They stood there, stunned. Then came the arguments. "He's lying. Germany cannot surrender. The Führer would never allow it. This is American propaganda. We should resist." A few women started to remove their armbands. Others stopped them. "Don't you dare. We took an oath." The Rad Oath was sacred. They'd recited it on their first day. "I promise always to strive in the Hitler Youth for the unity and comradeship of all German youth. I promise obedience to the Reich Youth leader and to all leaders of the Hitler Youth. I promise to participate actively in all Hitler Youth service." That oath wasn't just words. It was a psychological contract. Breaking it felt like betraying yourself. One woman, Greta Hoffmann, was 22. She'd been in the RAD since she was 19. 3 years of service, 3 years of belief, 3 years of certainty. She'd met the Führer once, at a rally in 1943. He'd looked right at her. She was sure of it. That moment had sustained her through everything. The bombings, the shortages, the defeats. Because she'd seen him. The man who would save Germany. And now this American was saying it was over? Impossible. An hour passed. The women hadn't burned anything. Or returned. He didn't look angry. He looked sad. "You think those uniforms represent honor?" he said. "You think they represent service? You think they represent Germany?" He paused. "Tomorrow, I'm going to show you what they really represent. And when you see it, you'll understand why I'm not giving you a choice anymore. You will burn those uniforms. Because when you see what I'm going to show you, you won't be able to look at them the same way again." The women muttered. Some laughed nervously. One shouted, "What can you show us that we don't already know? We know about the war. We know we lost. That doesn't change what we believe." Orr looked at her. "You have no idea what you don't know." He assigned guards, not to watch the women, to make sure they ate, to make sure they slept. He wanted them rested, because tomorrow would break them, and he needed them conscious for it. The next morning, May 2nd, 1945, Orr loaded all 400 women onto trucks. They drove north. The women were confused. Where were they going? Some thought they were being relocated. Others whispered about prisoner camps, maybe execution. No one knew. The trucks drove for 90 minutes, through devastated German countryside, past refugees, past destroyed tanks, past towns that were just rubble. Finally, the convoy stopped. The women were ordered off the trucks. They stood in a field outside a complex of buildings, industrial-looking, fences, barracks, guard towers. Some women recognized it. "That's Dachau," someone whispered. "The political camp." The Nazi regime had always admitted Dachau existed. It was for enemies of the state. Communists, criminals, traitors. Protective custody, they called it. Most Germans knew about camps like Dachau. They just didn't know what happened inside them. The regime said it was reformation, hard labor, discipline, making dangerous elements into productive citizens. The women had believed that. Why wouldn't they? Their government told them. Their teachers told them. The newspapers told them. Everyone they trusted told them the camps were necessary. Harsh, yes, but necessary. To protect Germany from its enemies. Orr didn't explain. He just pointed at the gates. "We're going inside." The women walked through. The conditions hit them first. The evidence of mass death. Not abstract, not theoretical, real. Several women reacted immediately with shock. Others tried to turn away. Some stopped walking. The guards pushed them forward gently. "Keep moving." The Americans had liberated Dachau 3 days earlier, on April 29th. They'd found over 30,000 prisoners, severely malnourished, too weak to celebrate, too exhausted to cry. The evidence of systematic death was everywhere. The American soldiers who liberated it had been combat veterans, men who'd seen Normandy, who'd fought through France, who'd survived the Bulge, and Dachau had broken them. grown men sobbing, officers unable to speak. The commanding general radioed Eisenhower. "You need to see this. Everyone needs to see this." Eisenhower came. He walked through the camp. He looked at everything. Then he issued an order. Every German civilian within 50 miles would be brought to see it. Every Nazi Party member would see it. Every person who claimed they didn't know would be forced to know. This was Orr's assignment. Bring the true believers, make them see, make them understand, make them reckon. The 400 women walked deeper into Dachau. They saw the barracks first, wooden buildings designed for 250 people, actually holding 1,500. Bunks 3 levels high, 6 people sharing space meant for one. No mattresses, no blankets, no heat. They saw the roll call square, where prisoners stood for hours, in summer heat, in winter snow, standing until they collapsed. They saw the punishment posts, where prisoners were subjected to torture, shoulders dislocated, hours of agony, for infractions like stealing bread. They saw the medical experimentation barracks, where doctors tested hypothermia limits on human subjects, where they conducted cruel experiments, where they practiced unnecessary procedures without proper medical ethics. The women kept walking. Some were crying now, others were silent. A few were still defiant. This is propaganda. The Americans staged this. But the evidence wasn't staged. And the prisoners, living prisoners, emaciated survivors in striped uniforms, watching these German women in Nazi uniforms walk through what had been done to them. Then Orr led them to the crematorium. The building was brick, industrial, efficient. Outside were the rail cars, evidence of the regime's final desperate attempts to hide the scale of death. Inside the crematorium were the ovens, 5 of them. Iron doors, evidence of their use still visible. Orr made every woman look inside, one by one. "This is what your uniforms built," he said. "This is what your service supported. This is what your oaths enabled." Greta Hoffmann looked into the oven. She saw the evidence of industrial death. She tried to look away. Orr gently turned her face back. "No, you need to see this, because you wore that uniform proudly. You need to understand what it meant." Greta started shaking. "I didn't know. We didn't know." Orr's voice was soft but firm. "That's not enough. Not knowing isn't innocence. It's complicity. You didn't want to know. No one forced you to be ignorant. You chose not to ask questions. You chose to trust. You chose to believe. And this is what your choice created." The women moved through the gas chamber next, disguised as showers, evidence of Zyklon B use still present. Then to the medical experimentation rooms, tables with restraints, surgical tools, jars with preserved specimens, human specimens, labeled, cataloged, scientific. Then to the areas where mass death had occurred. The scale was incomprehensible. Thousands. The women could see the evidence, the scope of systematic murder. One woman collapsed. Guards caught her. "I can't. Please, I can't see more." Orr knelt beside her. Neither could they, but they had no choice. You do. You can choose to see. You can choose to understand. Or you can choose to keep believing your comfortable lies. But if you make the second choice, you'll wear that uniform forever, in your soul, and you'll be responsible, not just for what was done, but for what continues because you refuse to see. The woman looked up at him, tears streaming. "What do you want from us? I want you to take responsibility. I want you to admit what you were part of. I want you to choose differently, starting now." 3 hours. Orr kept them in Dachau for 3 hours. He made them walk through everything. He made them see everything. He made them confront everything. He brought survivors to talk to them. A Polish professor who'd been imprisoned for teaching. A Catholic priest who'd been arrested for hiding Jews. A Roma woman who'd lost her entire family. The survivors didn't scream. They didn't attack. They just told their stories, calmly, factually. I was a teacher. I had 3 children. The Gestapo came in the night. They took me here. I never saw my children again. I don't know if they're alive. I worked in the quarry, carrying stones upstairs. 90 pounds on my back, 14 hours a day. If you stopped, they beat you. If you fell, they beat you. I watched hundreds die. For nothing. For no reason except they weren't German enough, or Aryan enough, or loyal enough. Your uniforms made this possible. Your service supported this. Your belief enabled this. The Arad women stood there. Many were sobbing now. Some were in shock. A few were still trying to resist. But we didn't do this. We built roads. We harvested crops. We didn't hurt anyone. A survivor, a Jewish man who'd been in Dachau since 1938, responded, "No, you didn't hurt us directly. You just made sure the system had enough labor to function, enough food to feed the guards, enough roads to transport us here. You didn't pull the triggers, but you loaded the guns. You didn't operate the machines of death, but you mined the coal that powered them. You were part of the machine. Every single part is responsible." Finally, Orr led them back outside, into the air, away from the evidence. The women stood there, devastated, their faces blank. Their uniforms suddenly felt heavy, contaminated, poisonous. Orr spoke. "I gave you an order yesterday. Burn your uniforms. You refused. You said those uniforms represented honor, service, Germany. Now you've seen what they actually represented. Now you understand what you were serving. So I'm giving you the order again. But this time, it's not really an order. It's an opportunity to choose who you want to be. Do you want to be the person who wore that uniform proudly, who believed without questioning, who served without thinking? Or do you want to be the person who saw the truth and chose differently? The person who took responsibility? The person who said, 'I was wrong. I was part of something evil. And I choose to be different now.' That choice starts with burning the uniform, because as long as you wear it, you're still part of it. As long as you keep it, you're still defending it. Destroying it doesn't erase what happened. Nothing can erase what happened. But it's the first step toward becoming someone new, someone who knows, someone who remembers, someone who chooses differently." The trucks drove them back to the labor camp. The women were silent. When they arrived, Orr had already prepared a fire pit, large, central, visible from everywhere in the camp. He'd also prepared civilian clothing, simple dresses, work clothes, plain, no insignia, no symbols, no identity markers, just clothes. He stood by the fire pit and waited. No speech, no pressure, just waiting. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. The women stood in their barracks, looking at their uniforms, touching the fabric, running fingers over the swastikas. Some were crying, others were just staring. Then one woman walked out. Not Greta, a younger woman, 18. She'd only been in the Arad for 4 months. She walked to the fire pit carrying her uniform, folded neatly, like she was handling something sacred. She stood there for a moment, looking at it. Then she threw it in. The brown fabric caught immediately. The swastika armband curled and blackened. She watched it burn. Then she walked to get civilian clothes. She didn't look back. That broke the dam. 2 more women came out, then 5, then 20. Within an hour, 300 women had burned their uniforms. They didn't celebrate. They didn't talk. They just burned them and walked away. But about 100 women refused. They stayed in their barracks, still in uniform, still clinging. Greta was among them. She sat on her bunk, holding her uniform shirt, the one she'd worn when she met the Führer. She couldn't do it. It felt like burning herself, like erasing her own existence. Orr came to the barracks. He didn't force anyone. He just sat down and started talking. "I understand," he said. "That uniform is who you've been for years. Burning it feels like losing yourself, like admitting your entire adult life was a mistake. That's terrifying. But here's what I need you to understand. You are not your uniform. You are not your beliefs. You are not what you were taught. You are your choices. Right now, today, this moment. You can choose to be the person who saw the truth and couldn't face it, who kept clinging to comfortable lies even after seeing the evidence. Or you can choose to be the person who had the courage to change, to admit you were wrong, to start over. That second choice is harder. It requires more strength, more courage, more character, but it's the only choice that leads to a future worth living. He left. The holdouts sat there, hour after hour. Some changed into civilian clothes without burning their uniforms. They hid them, folded them away. Maybe they'd burn them later, maybe never. Some wore the civilian clothes over their uniforms, compromising, transitioning. But Greta and about 30 others stayed in full uniform, through dinner, through evening, into night. The other women avoided them, created distance. The uniform had become a marker of something shameful, something contaminated, something to be avoided. Greta felt it, the isolation, the judgment, the separation. This was new. In the Arad, the uniform had created unity, belonging, identity. Now it created the opposite. She was marked. On the second day, Orr brought a survivor to talk to the holdouts, an elderly Jewish woman named Ruth Mendel. She'd survived Dachau, lost her husband and 2 sons there. She sat with the women in uniform and just talked to them, not about the camp, about her life before. She'd been a piano teacher in Munich. She'd taught German children. She'd loved Germany. She'd served in the First World War as a nurse. She'd earned an Iron Cross for bravery. She'd been as German as anyone. And then one day, she said, I wasn't German anymore. The government decided. The uniforms decided. People I'd taught, people I'd helped. They stopped seeing me as human. They saw me as a category, Jew, other, dangerous. And once they saw me that way, everything else followed. I didn't change. I was the same person, but the uniform changed how they saw me, and how they saw me changed what they did to me. She looked at Greta's uniform. That uniform tells you who you are. It tells you you're special, you're part of something important, you're serving something greater. But here's what it really does. It stops you from seeing other people as human. It makes them categories, other, lesser, dangerous. Once you put on that uniform, you stop thinking, you stop questioning, you stop feeling, you just serve, just obey, just believe. And that's how ordinary people do evil things. Not because they're monsters, because they're wearing a uniform that tells them they're heroes. Greta started crying. But I didn't hurt anyone. I built roads. I helped harvest food. I wasn't in the camps. I wasn't a guard. I didn't do anything wrong. Ruth's voice was gentle but firm. You didn't do anything wrong. That's true. But you also didn't do anything right. You saw the propaganda. You heard the hate speech. You noticed when your Jewish neighbors disappeared. You saw the violence in the streets, and you chose not to ask questions. You chose to believe the comfortable lies. You chose to trust the system because it was easier, because you benefited, because the uniform gave you identity and purpose and belonging. And that choice, that comfortable passivity, that willful ignorance, that's what made the camps possible. Not the guards, not the killers, but the millions of ordinary Germans who just went along, who just served, who just believed. Your roads transported prisoners, your harvests fed guards. Your service enabled the system. You didn't commit the crimes, but you made them possible. Greta sat there, holding her uniform. Everything Ruth said was true. She knew it. She'd always known it, somewhere deep down. But knowing and admitting are different things. Knowing you can live with. Admitting requires change. That night she had a nightmare. She was back at Dachau. But this time she was wearing her Arad uniform. And she was a prisoner. Standing in the roll call square. Watching guards in SS uniforms. Guards who looked exactly like her. Same age, same background, same beliefs. Just different uniforms. And she realized the only difference between her and them was assignment. She'd been sent to build roads. They'd been sent to guard camps. Same system, same obedience, same willingness to serve without questioning. If she'd been sent to Dachau instead of a road crew, what would she have done? Would she have refused? Would she have resisted? Or would she have obeyed? Would she have convinced herself it was necessary? Would she have worn that uniform and done those things because someone in authority told her to? She woke up shaking. She knew the answer. She would have obeyed, because that's what the uniform taught. Obedience, service, trust in authority. Never question, never doubt, never think for yourself. Just serve. The uniform didn't create evil, but it enabled it. It made it easy. It made it normal. It made it feel like duty instead of crime. At dawn on the third day, Greta walked to the fire pit, still holding her uniform. Other women watched. Some of the holdouts followed her. They stood around the pit. The fire was still burning from yesterday. Always kept burning, waiting. Greta looked at her uniform one last time. This wasn't just cloth. This was her identity, her purpose, her belonging, her certainty, her youth, everything she'd believed, everything she'd been, and it was all built on a lie. A lie she'd chosen to believe because it was comfortable, because it made her feel special, because it gave her purpose. But it was still a lie. And lies, no matter how comfortable, no matter how meaningful, no matter how identity-affirming, they're still lies. She threw the uniform in, watched it burn, watched the swastika curl and blacken and disappear. And she felt something unexpected. Not grief, not loss, relief. The uniform was gone. The identity was gone. The certainty was gone. But the responsibility to choose remained. And for the first time in years, she was free to choose. Not free from consequences. Not free from guilt. Not free from the past. But free to choose who she would become. Free to think. Free to question. Free to be more than what she'd been taught to be. 28 other women followed her that morning. They burned their uniforms. Some cried. Some were silent. Some looked angry. But they all did it. Only 2 women kept their uniforms. They packed them away, refused to burn them, refused to change, or didn't force them. Some people, he told his sergeant, would rather die than admit they were wrong. You can show them the truth, you can give them every opportunity to change, but you can't make them choose. That's the terrible freedom of being human. We can choose to cling to lies even when the truth is burning in front of us. Those 2 women eventually left the camp, disappeared into post-war Germany. No one knows what happened to them. Maybe they changed eventually, maybe they never did. Maybe they spent their lives defending what they'd believed, trying to make their past make sense, trying to avoid the unbearable knowledge that they'd been part of something monstrous. But the others, the ones who burned their uniforms, they had to figure out who they were now, without the uniform, without the identity, without the certainty. It wasn't easy. Greta spent months in a fog, depressed, confused, angry. She'd lost everything she'd believed, and she had nothing to replace it with. The Allied occupation government offered denazification courses, rehabilitation programs. But Greta didn't go. She didn't want more indoctrination. She didn't want to be told what to believe. She wanted to figure it out herself. She got a job cleaning buildings, menial work. Nothing glamorous, nothing meaningful, just work. She avoided other Germans, especially former RAD members. Some were in denial, some were defensive, some were still true believers, just hiding it. She didn't want to be around them. She didn't want to be around anyone who might make her comfortable again. Because comfort was what had made her complicit the first time. Comfort and certainty and belonging. She needed to be uncomfortable. She needed uncertainty. She needed to be alone with what she'd been part of. Not as punishment, as reminder, as guard against ever falling into that trap again. A year after burning her uniform, she met a survivor. Not planned, just random. In a market, an older man, emaciated, striped prison uniform visible under his civilian coat. He'd just been released from a displaced persons camp. He was buying bread. His hands were shaking. Greta watched him count his money 3 times, making sure he had enough, like he couldn't trust his own counting. She wanted to look away. It was easier to avoid survivors, easier not to be reminded. But she forced herself to keep watching, to see him, to acknowledge him. Not as a category, not as survivor or victim or Jew. As a person her uniform had helped hurt, a person her willful ignorance had helped victimize, a person who was real and here and struggling to buy bread while she stood there, free and healthy and guilty. He dropped his money, coins scattered. He bent down slowly, painfully, to collect them. People walked past. No one helped. German shoppers avoiding eye contact, not wanting to engage, not wanting to acknowledge the comfortable invisibility of guilt. Greta bent down and helped him. He looked at her, startled, suspicious. She handed him the coins. "I'm sorry," she said. Not a grand apology, not a speech, just those 2 words. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded, took the coins, bought his bread, and left. They never spoke again. She doesn't know if he forgave her. She doesn't know if he even understood what she was apologizing for. But it mattered anyway, not because it helped him. It probably didn't, but because it was her choosing. Choosing to acknowledge, choosing to see, choosing to take responsibility, choosing to be uncomfortable. That's what life after the uniform meant. Not redemption. Not forgiveness, not moving on, but choosing every single day to remember, to see, to acknowledge, to never let herself become comfortable again. By 1950, Greta had become a teacher, teaching young German children, post-war generation, children who'd never worn uniforms, never been indoctrinated, never been taught hate. She taught them history, not propaganda, not comfortable national myths. History, the real kind, with complexity and ambiguity and uncomfortable truths. She told them about the Reich, about what it really was, what it really did, what people like her had enabled by choosing comfort over courage. Some parents complained, "You're making our children feel guilty for things they didn't do." Greta would respond, "I'm not teaching guilt. I'm teaching responsibility, the responsibility to think, to question, to never trust uniforms or flags, or leaders who demand obedience without thought, the responsibility to be uncomfortable when things don't make sense, to ask questions even when everyone else is certain. That's what I'm teaching, because I didn't learn it, and my generation burned in the fire of our certainty." Most parents withdrew their complaints. Some understood, some didn't. But Greta kept teaching, because that was her choice. Not atonement, not redemption. Just choice. The choice to be the kind of person who'd learned from her uniform, who'd seen what certainty and obedience and comfortable belonging could create, and who'd chosen to teach the next generation differently. In 1963, Greta received a letter from Colonel Orr, now retired, living in Connecticut, teaching philosophy again. The letter was short. I think about those 3 days often, about whether I did the right thing, whether forcing you to see was ethical, whether I had the right. I don't have answers, but I wanted you to know. I didn't do it to punish you. I did it to give you a choice, the choice to see or to stay blind, the choice to change or to stay the same, the choice to be responsible or to hide in ignorance. I hope you made the choice that lets you sleep at night. I hope you found a way to live with what you saw. I hope you're using that knowledge somehow, making it mean something. Because if you're not, then those 3 days were just cruelty. But if you are, then maybe they were education, the hard kind, the kind that costs something, but the kind that matters. Greta wrote back, "I'm a teacher now. I teach children to question, to think, to be uncomfortable with easy answers. I teach them about uniforms, about how belonging can become complicity, about how certainty can become cruelty, about how ordinary people enable extraordinary evil by choosing comfort over courage. I don't know if it matters. I don't know if they'll listen. I don't know if they'll remember when they're adults and someone offers them a uniform and tells them they're special and asks them to trust without questioning. But I'm teaching it anyway, because that's my choice. The choice you gave me when you made me burn my uniform. Thank you for that. It was the worst 3 days of my life, and the most important. Orr died in 1970. His family found a box in his study, filled with letters, from Germans he'd worked with during denazification. Most were angry. Accusations, denials, defenses. But scattered among them were letters like Greta's, from people who'd chosen to change, who'd chosen to see, who'd chosen to take responsibility, who'd used what they'd learned, who'd made it mean something. Not many letters, maybe 20. Out of thousands of Germans he'd worked with, a tiny percentage. But Orr had kept everyone, because they represented what he'd been trying to do. Not punish, not shame, but offer choice. The terrible, beautiful, unbearable choice to see truth and choose differently. Most people refused that choice. Most people clung to their comfortable lies, their justifications, their defenses, their certainty. But some didn't. Some chose to change. And that, Orr believed, was what made the difference between learning from history and repeating it. Not whether you could prevent people from creating evil systems. You couldn't. Evil systems emerge from human nature, from our need for belonging and certainty and purpose. But you could teach people to recognize those systems, to question them, to resist the seduction of certainty, to choose courage over comfort, to burn the uniform before it burns everything else. Greta taught for 30 years. She retired in 1980, spent her retirement writing memoir, but not the comfortable kind, not the redemption narrative, not the "I was wrong but now I'm right" story. Just the facts, what she believed, how she believed it, what made her complicit, what she chose to do after. She died in 1995, 50 years after burning her uniform. Her memoir was published posthumously. It's not popular, it's not inspiring, it's uncomfortable. It makes readers complicit in their own certainties. Makes them ask, what uniforms am I wearing? What comfortable beliefs am I clinging to? What am I choosing not to see because seeing would require change? Those aren't easy questions. Most people don't want to ask them, but some do. Students, teachers, people who wonder if they'd have the courage to burn their own uniforms if someone made them see what those uniforms really represented. People who understand that the only thing separating them from Greta in 1945 is circumstance and choice, and who want to make better choices now, before someone has to show them the camps their choices are building. The fire pit at that labor camp outside Munich is gone now, covered by a shopping center. No plaque, no memorial, no historical marker. Most people don't know what happened there, that 400 women stood at a choice point. That most of them chose to burn their uniforms and start over. That some chose to cling to certainty even after seeing truth. That this tiny moment in a forgotten camp represented something larger than itself. Because it wasn't about Germany. It wasn't about Nazis. It wasn't even about World War II. It was about the choice everyone faces eventually. The choice between comfortable lies and uncomfortable truths. Between certainty and responsibility. Between belonging and thinking, between the uniform and yourself. Most people never face that choice explicitly. Never have someone force them to see what their choices are creating. Never have to stand at a fire pit and decide who they want to be. But the choice exists anyway. In every moment, in every decision, in everything you choose to believe or question. Every time you accept something because everyone around you accepts it. Every time you trust authority without evidence. Every time you choose belonging over truth. You're making the same choice those women made. You're putting on the uniform, and someday, maybe, someone will make you see what that uniform really represents. What it's really building. What you're really enabling. And you'll have to choose. Will you burn it, or will you cling to it? Will you change, or will you defend? Will you take responsibility, or will you hide in comfortable lies? That's not a historical question. That's not about 1945. That's about right now, about the uniforms you're wearing today, the beliefs you're clinging to, the certainties you're trusting, the questions you're not asking, because the uniform isn't cloth. It's ideology. It's tribal belonging. It's unquestioned certainty. It's the feeling that your side is right and the other side is wrong, and there's no need to think deeper because everyone you trust agrees with you. That's the uniform. And it's burning the world just like it burned Germany. Different details, different symbols, different flags, but same mechanism, same seduction, same result. So here's the question. If someone showed you the camps your uniform is building, would you have the courage to burn it? Or would you be one of the ones who kept it, who packed it away, who defended it, who spent the rest of your life trying to make it make sense? You don't have to answer now, but you will answer eventually. Either by choosing to burn your uniform before someone forces you to see what it represents, or by clinging to it until the truth becomes unbearable. The choice is yours. The choice is always yours. That's the terrible freedom of being human. We can choose to see, or we can choose to stay blind. But we can't choose to avoid the consequences of that choice. Because the consequences come regardless. They came for Germany in 1945. They'll come for whatever system you're part of eventually. The only question is whether you'll see it coming and choose differently, or whether someone will have to drag you through your own Dachau before you understand. And that's the real reason those women shook when ordered to burn their uniforms. Not because the uniforms were valuable, not because they were attached to the cloth, but because burning the uniform meant admitting they'd been wrong. About everything, about their entire worldview, about their purpose, about their identity, about their leaders, about their country, about themselves. It meant admitting that everything they'd trusted was a lie, that everyone they'd believed had lied to them, that their service hadn't been noble, it had been complicit, that their certainty hadn't been wisdom, it had been willful ignorance, that their belonging hadn't been community, it had been cult. And humans will do almost anything to avoid that admission. We'll rationalize, we'll justify, we'll defend, we'll attack anyone who challenges our certainty, we'll ignore evidence, we'll deny reality, we'll cling to comfortable lies even when uncomfortable truths are burning in front of us. Because admitting we were wrong about something fundamental doesn't feel like growth. It feels like death, the death of who we thought we were. But here's what Greta learned in the 50 years after burning her uniform. That death is actually birth. The death of false certainty creates space for real wisdom. The death of comfortable belonging creates space for authentic community. The death of unquestioned loyalty creates space for examined values. The death of the uniform creates space for the person underneath. But you have to be willing to die first. You have to be willing to stand at that fire pit. You have to be willing to throw in everything you've believed. You have to be willing to not know who you are for a while. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable, uncertain, alone, without the uniform to tell you who you are and what to believe and where you belong. That's terrifying. That's why most people don't do it. That's why most of human history is just people clinging to their uniforms while the world burns. Because burning the uniform requires courage that most people don't have. Not because they're bad people, but because the uniform is designed to make you dependent on it. It gives you identity, purpose, belonging, certainty, community, meaning. Everything humans desperately need. And it whispers, without me, you're nothing. Without me, you're alone. Without me, you're lost. And most people believe that whisper. They believe they need the uniform. They believe they can't survive without it. They believe burning it means losing themselves. But Greta learned the opposite. Burning the uniform didn't mean losing herself. It meant finding herself. The real self. The self that could think, that could question, that could choose. That could take responsibility, that could change, that could grow. That self was always there, under the uniform, waiting, but it couldn't emerge until the uniform burned. In her memoir, Greta wrote about a conversation she had in 1975 with a student. The student asked, "If you could go back to 1942, when you first joined the RAD, what would you tell yourself?" Greta thought for a long time. Then she said, I wouldn't tell myself anything about the future. I wouldn't warn myself about what was coming, because my younger self wouldn't have believed me. She would have dismissed me as enemy propaganda, as defeatism, as betrayal. That's what the uniform does. It gives you defenses against truth. No, I wouldn't tell my younger self about the future. I'd ask her questions. I'd ask, why do you believe what you believe? Who told you those things? What evidence do you have? What questions aren't you asking? What are you afraid to doubt? Who benefits from your certainty? What happens to people who disagree? Where do they go? Why don't you see them anymore? I'd ask those questions and then I'd walk away, because the only person who could have saved my younger self was my younger self. By choosing to question, by choosing to look, by choosing to think instead of believe. No one could do that for her. I couldn't do it. Colonel Orr couldn't do it. Even seeing Dachau couldn't do it. I still had to choose to admit what I was seeing meant something about me. That's the hardest part. Not seeing the truth, but admitting that the truth has implications for you, that it requires change, that it means you were wrong, that you enabled evil, that you have to become someone different. That's the choice no one can make for you. The student asked a follow-up question, but what about people who never get shown their Dachau, who never get forced to see, who go their whole lives believing comfortable lies? What about them? Greta smiled sadly. They build the next Dachau. That's what happens. Evil doesn't take a generation off. It doesn't say, well, we did the Holocaust. Let's wait 50 years before trying again. It just finds new uniforms, new symbols, new certainties, new belongings, new people willing to serve without questioning, new people choosing comfort over courage, new people who think their uniform is different, who think their cause is just, who think their certainty is wisdom, who think they would never do what we did. And then they do exactly what we did. Different details, different justifications, different enemies, but same mechanism, same choices, same results. Because the problem was never the swastika. The problem was the willingness to wear it without questioning what it meant. The willingness to belong without thinking about the cost. The willingness to be certain without examining the foundations. That problem doesn't go away. It's built into human psychology. We want to belong. We want to be certain. We want to serve something greater than ourselves. Those aren't bad desires. They're deeply human. But they're also the desires that uniforms exploit. They're the desires that make us vulnerable to ideology, to tribalism, to fascism in all its forms. So the question isn't how to eliminate those desires. The question is how to channel them toward truth instead of comfort, toward thinking instead of believing, toward courage instead of certainty. The student pressed further. So how do we do that? How do we know if we're wearing a uniform right now? Greta was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You're always wearing a uniform." That's the truth no one wants to hear. Everyone belongs to something. Everyone believes something. Everyone trusts someone. Everyone has certainties they don't question. The question isn't whether you're wearing a uniform. The question is whether you're willing to examine it, whether you're willing to ask hard questions about it, whether you're willing to burn it if you discover it's built on lies. Here's how you know if your uniform is dangerous. Ask yourself, what am I not allowed to question? What doubts am I punishing in myself and others? What evidence am I ignoring because it contradicts what I want to believe? Who am I dismissing as other or enemy without really listening to them? What am I certain about without really knowing why? Those questions will tell you everything, because dangerous uniforms always have forbidden questions, always have unquestionable leaders, always have enemies who must be defeated rather than understood, always have certainties that can't be examined, always have loyalty tests that punish doubt. If your uniform has those things, it's dangerous. It might not lead to camps, it might not lead to genocide, but it's leading somewhere dark, and you're enabling it by refusing to question, by choosing comfort, by clinging to certainty, by wearing the uniform without thinking about what it represents. That conversation stuck with the student. She went on to become a journalist. Spent her career asking uncomfortable questions, challenging comfortable certainties, refusing to wear uniforms. She wasn't always popular. People don't like having their certainties questioned. People don't like being made uncomfortable. People don't like being reminded that their uniforms might mean something they don't want to admit. But she did it anyway, because Greta had taught her something crucial. Comfort is not the same as truth. Belonging is not the same as wisdom. Certainty is not the same as understanding. And wearing a uniform is not the same as being right. Those distinctions matter. They're the difference between learning from history and repeating it. They're the difference between building something worth preserving and building another Dachau. They're the difference between choosing courage and choosing comfort. Between thinking and believing. Between being responsible and being complicit. Between burning the uniform and wearing it until someone forces you to see what it really represents. In 2008, a German documentary crew traveled to interview survivors of the labor camp where the uniform burning happened. Most of the women were dead by then, but they found 3, all in their 80s, all willing to talk. The first woman, Anna, said, "I burned my uniform that first day. I saw what needed to be done and I did it. But I didn't understand it. Not really. I was just following orders again. It took me years to understand that burning the uniform wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The beginning of having to think for myself, to question everything, to take responsibility for my own beliefs instead of borrowing them from authorities." That was harder than burning the uniform, because at least burning the uniform was a single action. Learning to think for yourself is a lifetime project. I'm still working on it. At 86, I'm still catching myself accepting things without questioning. Still catching myself wanting certainty more than truth. Still catching myself drawn to comfortable beliefs instead of uncomfortable evidence. The uniform is gone. But the habit of wearing uniforms, that takes forever to unlearn. The second woman, Elise, said, "I kept my uniform for 3 years, hid it, couldn't bring myself to burn it. I finally did it in 1948, after reading about the Nuremberg trials, after seeing the evidence presented there, after realizing that the people I'd trusted, the leaders I'd believed in, had known exactly what they were doing. They weren't mistaken. They weren't deceived. They were evil, and I'd served them willingly. Not because they forced me, because I wanted to belong. I wanted to matter. I wanted to be part of something greater than myself. And they gave me that feeling. And I never questioned what I was actually part of. That's on me, not on them. They were evil, but I was complicit, and I stayed complicit for 3 years after burning my uniform because I still wanted to believe I'd been innocent, that I hadn't really been part of it, that my service didn't matter. It took me 3 years to admit that it did matter, that every part of the machine matters, that there's no such thing as innocent complicity. That's what I wish I'd learned earlier. That you can't serve evil systems and claim innocence just because you weren't at the center. The machine needs every gear. And if you're a gear, you're responsible. The third woman refused to give her name. She just said, "I'm one of the 2 who never burned my uniform. I kept it, I still have it, in my attic. I haven't looked at it in decades, but I know it's there. And you want to know something? I still don't think I was wrong. Not completely. Yes, the camps were evil. Yes, the leadership was evil. Yes, terrible things were done. But the idea behind the R8, service to community, building something together, dedicating yourself to something larger than individual selfishness, that wasn't evil. That was good. The problem was the execution, not the principle. And burning the uniform felt like admitting the principle was wrong. Like admitting that service and sacrifice and community are wrong. And I don't believe that. I still don't believe that. So I kept the uniform, not because I'm proud of the swastika. I'm not. But because burning it felt like destroying something more than just a piece of cloth. It felt like destroying the part of my youth that believed in something, that worked hard, that sacrificed, that cared about more than myself. And I wasn't willing to destroy that, even if it meant staying connected to something evil. Maybe that makes me a coward. Maybe that makes me complicit still. I don't know. I'm 84 years old and I still don't know if I made the right choice, but I made it, and I have to live with it. The documentary crew asked all 3 women the same final question. What do you want young people today to learn from your experience? Anna said, "Learn to be uncomfortable. Learn that comfort and certainty are not the same as truth. Learn that belonging is not worth the cost if you have to stop thinking to belong. Learn to question everything, especially the things everyone around you accepts without question. Learn to recognize uniforms even when they're invisible. Learn to burn them before they burn you." Elise said, "Learn that complicity is a choice. Learn that saying 'I didn't know' or 'I was just doing my job' or 'I didn't have a choice' are lies we tell ourselves. You always have a choice. It might be a hard choice. It might be a costly choice. It might be a lonely choice. But it's always there. And refusing to choose is itself a choice. It's choosing to enable. So learn to choose consciously. Choose with full knowledge of what you're enabling and what you're preventing. Choose with your eyes open. And be willing to pay the cost of choosing right instead of choosing easy." The unnamed woman said, "Learn that the world isn't simple. Learn that burning the uniform isn't always right and keeping it isn't always wrong. Learn that good intentions can serve evil purposes and that recognizing that ambiguity is important. Learn that you'll probably be wrong about important things, that you'll probably enable things you regret, that you'll probably look back and wish you'd made different choices, and learn to forgive yourself for that while still taking responsibility for it. Because if you can't forgive yourself, you'll spend your life defending your mistakes instead of learning from them. And that's how you become me, 84 years old, still defending a decision I made when I was 22, still unable to burn a uniform that should have burned 70 years ago." The documentary never aired. The production company decided it was too ambiguous, too uncomfortable. Viewers wanted clarity. They wanted heroes and villains. They wanted to know who was right. They wanted redemption arcs and clear moral lessons. They didn't want 3 old women giving 3 different answers. They didn't want ambiguity. They didn't want the suggestion that burning the uniform might not be the end of the story. They didn't want to think about their own uniforms. So the documentary sat in an archive, unwatched, until a researcher found it in 2019 and uploaded it to the internet, where it got 17,000 views, mostly from people who already agreed with it, mostly from people who didn't need to hear the message because they were already questioning their own uniforms, the people who needed to see it, the people currently wearing uniforms without questioning them, the people choosing comfort over courage, the people certain of their own righteousness. They didn't watch it. They never do. Because the uniform protects you from messages that might make you question the uniform. That's its function. That's what makes it so dangerous. It doesn't just give you identity and belonging and certainty. It gives you defenses against anything that might threaten that identity and belonging and certainty. And that's why the story of those 400 women matters. Not because they were uniquely evil, not because they were uniquely complicit, but because they were normal, ordinary, average. Women who wanted to belong, who wanted to serve, who wanted to matter, who wanted certainty, who wanted community, universal human desires. And those desires made them vulnerable to ideology that exploited those desires for evil purposes. They put on uniforms. They served without questioning. They believed without examining. They belonged without thinking. And they enabled monstrous evil. Not because they were monsters, because they were human. And humans are vulnerable to this. All of us, always, in every generation, in every country, in every ideology. Right now, somewhere, someone is putting on a uniform, accepting certainties without examination, trusting authorities without evidence, choosing belonging over truth, serving systems without questioning where those systems lead, building the next Dachau. Different details, different symbols, different justifications, but same mechanism, same vulnerability, same result. Unless they choose differently, unless they burn the uniform, unless they choose courage over comfort, unless they ask forbidden questions, unless they examine uncomfortable evidence, unless they take responsibility instead of hiding in innocence, unless they become the person who sees and changes instead of the person who sees and defends. That's the choice. That's always the choice. That's the choice those women faced in April 1945. That's the choice you face right now. What uniforms are you wearing? What certainties are you clinging to? What questions are you afraid to ask? What evidence are you ignoring? What belonging are you choosing over truth? What systems are you enabling by refusing to question? What are you building by choosing comfort over courage? And if someone showed you the camps your choices are building, would you have the strength to burn your uniform? Or would you keep it? Would you defend it? Would you spend the rest of your life trying to make it make sense? You don't have to answer now. But you'll answer eventually. Through your choices, through your questions, through your courage or your comfort, through what you burn and what you keep. The answer is already being written. In every choice you make, in every question you ask or don't ask, in every uncomfortable truth you face or avoid, in every uniform you wear or burn. The only question is whether you'll be conscious of writing that answer, whether you'll choose deliberately, whether you'll have the courage to burn what needs burning before someone forces you to see what it represents, because eventually, someone will. History has a way of making people see, of forcing confrontation with truth, of presenting the bill for comfortable lies. And when that moment comes, when you're standing at your own fire pit, looking at your own uniform, deciding who you want to be, will you have the courage to burn it? Or will your hands shake as you clutch it tighter, still certain, still defending, still refusing to see? That's the question those German women answered in April 1945. That's the question you'll answer too. The only difference is whether you'll answer it now, while there's still time to choose differently, or later, when the choice is no longer whether to burn the uniform, but whether to admit that you should have burned it years ago. One choice leads to growth. The other leads to defending mistakes for the rest of your life. Choose wisely. Your future self is watching. And someday, you'll have to look them in the eye and explain why you made the choices you made. Make sure you'll be proud of that explanation. Make sure it's not just another comfortable lie. Make sure it's the truth. The uncomfortable, costly, courageous truth. That's what burning the uniform means. Not destroying your past, but choosing your future. The future where you think instead of believe, where you question instead of accept, where you take responsibility instead of hiding in innocence, where you choose courage over comfort. That future is always available. The uniform can always be burned. The question is whether you'll burn it now, or whether you'll wait until someone makes you see what it really represents. And by then, it might be too late. Not too late to burn it, but too late to undo what it built while you were wearing it. That's the real cost of waiting. Not that you'll never change, but that you'll change after the damage is done, after the camps are built, after the evil is enabled, after the complicity is complete. You can still change then. But the people hurt by what you enabled while you wore the uniform, they don't get to change their suffering. That's permanent. That's the cost they paid for your comfort, for your certainty, for your unwillingness to burn the uniform sooner. Remember that. When you're deciding whether to ask uncomfortable questions, when you're deciding whether to examine your certainties, when you're deciding whether to burn your uniform, remember that your comfort has a cost and someone else is paying it. Make sure it's worth it. Make sure whatever you're certain about is actually true. Make sure whatever you're belonging to is actually worth the cost. Make sure the uniform you're wearing actually represents what you think it represents. Because if it doesn't, you'll have to burn it eventually. And the longer you wait, the more it costs. The more damage it does. The more people it hurts. The harder it becomes to admit you were wrong. Burn it now, while it's still just a choice, before it becomes a necessity. Before someone has to drag you through your own Dachau to make you see. Burn it now, and start becoming the person you want to be. The person who thinks, who questions, who chooses courage, who takes responsibility, who refuses to hide in comfortable lies. That person is waiting, under the uniform, ready to emerge, but only if you burn what's covering them. Only if you choose to see. Only if you have the courage to change. That's what those German women learned. That's what they're still teaching. 75 years later, from beyond the grave, from archived documentaries, from uncomfortable truths that most people don't want to hear. They're teaching you the same lesson they learned. The hard way, the costly way, the way that leaves scars. You can learn it the easy way, by choosing now, by burning the uniform before someone shows you why you should have, by becoming who you need to be before circumstances force you to. That's the gift they're offering. The hard-won wisdom of people who learned too late, who enabled too much, who hurt too many, who spent their lives living with the consequences of wearing the uniform too long. Take the gift, learn the lesson, burn the uniform, and start choosing consciously, with courage, with truth, with responsibility. That's how you avoid becoming them. That's how you avoid building the next Dachau. That's how you become the person who sees the fire and chooses to burn what needs burning, before the whole world burns instead.